Good evening, and welcome to the Sleepy Story. Tonight, we wander into the deep forests and quiet kingdoms of the old Grimm fairy tales. These are stories that have been told for centuries. Stories of enchanted princes, forgotten castles, mysterious forests, and the strange magic that sometimes appears in the lives of ordinary people. As the night grows quieter around you, allow your body to relax and let the worries of the day slowly fade away. In tonight's journey, we will follow a young prince into a dark forest where a mysterious, wild man waits. Travel across distant lands in search of an enchanted princess and hear the strange tale of a physician whose godfather was none other than death itself. These stories move slowly like footsteps through an ancient forest, so settle comfortably. Let your breathing slow and allow these old tales to carry you gently toward sleep. Our first story begins in a kingdom beside a great forest, where a young prince was about to meet a very unusual guardian. This is the story of Iron John. Iron John. There was once, on a time, a king who had a great forest near his palace, full of all kinds of wild animals. One day, he sent out a huntsman to shoot him a roe, but he did not come back. Perhaps some accident has befallen him, said the king. And the next day, he sent out 2 more huntsmen who were to search for him, but they too stayed away. Then on the 3rd day, he sent for all his huntsmen and said, "Scour the whole forest through, and do not give up until ye have found all 3. But of these also none came home again, and of the pack of hounds which they had taken with them, none were seen more. From that time forth, no one would any longer venture into the forest, and it lay there in deep stillness and solitude, and nothing was seen of it, but sometimes an eagle or a hawk flying over it. This lasted for many years, when a strange huntsman announced himself to the king as seeking a situation and offered to go into the dangerous forest. The king, however, would not give his consent and said, "It is not safe in there. I fear it would fare with thee no better than with the others, and thou wouldst never come out again." The huntsman replied, "Lord, I will venture it at my own risk. Of fear I know nothing." The huntsman therefore betook himself with his dog to the forest. It was not long before the dog fell in with some game on the way and wanted to pursue it. But hardly had the dog run 2 steps when it stood before a deep pool, could go no farther, and a naked arm stretched itself out of the water, seized it, and drew it under. When the huntsman saw that he went back and fetched 3 men to come with buckets and bail out the water. When they could see to the bottom, there lay a wild man, whose body was brown like rusty iron, and whose hair hung over his face down to his knees. They bound him with cords and led him away to the castle. There was great astonishment over the wild man. The king, however, had him put in an iron cage in his courtyard, and forbade the door to be opened on pain of death, and the queen herself was to take the key into her keeping. And from this time forth, everyone could again go into the forest with safety. The king had a son of 8 years who was once playing in the courtyard, and while he was playing, his golden ball fell into the cage. The boy ran thither and said, "Give me my ball out." "Not till thou hast opened the door for me," answered the man. "No," said the boy, "I will not do that. The king has forbidden it," and ran away. The next day he again went and asked for his ball. The wild man said, "Open my door," but the boy would not. On the 3rd day, the king had ridden out hunting, and the boy went once more and said, "I cannot open the door, even if I wished, for I have not the key." So then the wild man said, "It lies under thy mother's pillow. Thou canst get it there." The boy, who wanted to have his ball back, cast all thought to the winds and brought the key. The door opened with difficulty, and the boy pinched his fingers. When it was open, the wild man stepped out, gave him the golden ball, and hurried away. The boy had become afraid. He called and cried after him, "O wild man, do not go away, or I shall be beaten." The wild man turned back, took him up, set him on his shoulder, and went with hasty steps into the forest. When the king came home, he observed the empty cage and asked the queen how that had happened. She knew nothing about it and sought the key, but it was gone. She called the boy, but no one answered. The king sent out people to seek for him in the fields, but they did not find him. Then he could easily guess what had happened, and much grief reigned in the royal court. When the wild man had once more reached the dark forest, he took the boy down from his shoulder and said to him, "Thou wilt never see thy father and mother again, but I will keep thee with me, for thou hast set me free, and I have compassion on thee. If thou dost all I bid thee, thou shalt fare well. Of treasure and gold have I enough, and more than anyone in the world." He made a bed of moss for the boy, on which he slept, and the next morning the man took him to a well and said, "Behold the gold well is as bright and clear as crystal. Thou shalt sit beside it, and take care that nothing falls into it, or it will be polluted. I will come every evening to see if thou hast obeyed my order." The boy placed himself by the margin of the well, and often saw a golden fish or a golden snake show itself therein, and took care that nothing fell in. As he was thus sitting, his finger hurt him so violently that he involuntarily put it in the water. He drew it quickly out again, but saw that it was quite gilded, and whatsoever pains he took to wash the gold off, again all was to no purpose. In the evening, Iron John came back, looked at the boy, and said, "What has happened to the well?" "Nothing, nothing," he answered, and held his finger behind his back that the man might not see it. But he said, "Thou hast dipped thy finger into the water. This time it may pass, but take care thou dost not again let anything go in." By daybreak, the boy was already sitting by the well and watching it. His finger hurt him again, and he passed it over his head, and then, unhappily, a hair fell down into the well. He took it quickly out, but it was already quite gilded. Iron John came, and already knew what had happened. "Thou hast let a hair fall into the well," said he. "I will allow thee to watch by it once more. But if this happens for the third time, then the well is polluted, and thou canst no longer remain with me." On the third day, the boy sat by the well and did not stir his finger, however much it hurt him. But the time was long to him, and he looked at the reflection of his face on the surface of the water. And as he still bent down more and more while he was doing so, and trying to look straight into the eyes, his long hair fell down from his shoulders into the water. He raised himself up quickly, but the whole of the hair of his head was already golden and shone like the sun. You may imagine how terrified the poor boy was. He took his pocket handkerchief and tied it round his head, in order that the man might not see it. When he came, he already knew everything, and said, "Take the handkerchief off." Then the golden hair streamed forth, and let the boy excuse himself as he might, it was of no use. "Thou hast not stood the trial, and canst stay here no longer. Go forth into the world, There thou wilt learn what poverty is, but as thou hast not a bad heart, and as I mean well by thee, there is one thing I will grant thee. If thou fallest into any difficulty, come to the forest and cry, Iron John, and then I will come and help thee. My power is great, greater than thou thinkest, and I have gold and silver in abundance. Then the king's son left the forest and walked by beaten and unbeaten paths, ever onwards, until at length he reached a great city. There he looked for work, but could find none, and he had learnt nothing by which he could help himself. At length he went to the palace and asked if they would take him in. The people about court did not at all know what use they could make of him, but they liked him and told him to stay. At length the cook took him into his service and said he might carry wood and water and rake the cinders together. Once, when it so happened that no one else was at hand, the cook ordered him to carry the food to the royal table. But as he did not like to let his golden hair be seen, he kept his little cap on. Such a thing as that had never yet come under the king's notice, and he said, When thou comest to the royal table, thou must take thy hat off. He answered, Ah, Lord, I cannot. I have a bad, sore place on my head. Then the king had the cook called before him and scolded him and asked how he could take such a boy as that into his service, and that he was to turn him off at once. The cook, however, had pity on him and exchanged him for the gardener's boy. And now the boy had to plant and water the garden hoe, and dig, and bear the wind and bad weather. Once in summer, when he was working alone in the garden, the day was so warm, he took his little cap off that the air might cool him. As the sun shone on his hair, it glittered and flashed so that the rays fell into the bedroom of the king's daughter, and up she sprang to see what that could be. Then she saw the boy and cried to him, Boy, bring me a wreath of flowers. He put his cap on with all haste and gathered wild field flowers and bound them together. When he was ascending the stairs with them, the gardener met him and said, How canst thou take the king's daughter a garland of such common flowers? Go quickly and get another, and seek out the prettiest and rarest. Oh no, replied the boy. The wild ones have more scent and will please her better. When he got into the room, the king's daughter said, Take thy cap off. It is not seemly to keep it on in my presence. He again said, I may not, I have a sore head. She, however, caught at his cap and pulled it off, and then his golden hair rolled down on his shoulders, and it was splendid to behold. He wanted to run out, but she held him by the arm and gave him a handful of ducats. With these he departed, but he cared nothing for the gold pieces. He took them to the gardener and said, I present them to thy children. They can play with them. The following day, the king's daughter again called to him that he was to bring her a wreath of field flowers. And when he went in with it, she instantly snatched at his cap and wanted to take it away from him, but he held it fast with both hands. She again gave him a handful of ducats, but he would not keep them, and gave them to the gardener for playthings for his children. On the third day, things went just the same. She could not get his cap away from him, and he would not have her money. Not long afterwards, the country was overrun by war. The king gathered together his people and did not know whether or not he could offer any opposition to the enemy, who was superior in strength and had a mighty army. Then said the gardener's boy, I am grown up and will go to the wars. Also only give me a horse. The others laughed and said, Seek one for thyself when we are gone. We will leave one behind us in the stable for thee. When they had gone forth, he went into the stable and got the horse out. It was lame of one foot and limped hobblety-jig, hobblety-jig. Nevertheless, he mounted it and rode away to the dark forest. When he came to the outskirts, he called Iron John 3 times so loudly that it echoed through the trees. Thereupon, the wild man appeared immediately and said, What dost thou desire? I want a strong steed, for I am going to the wars. That thou shalt have, and still more than thou askest for. And then the wild man went back into the forest, and it was not long before a stable boy came out of it, who led a horse that snorted with its nostrils and could hardly be restrained. And behind them followed a great troop of soldiers, entirely equipped in iron, and their swords flashed in the sun. The youth made over his 3-legged horse to the stable boy, mounted the other, and rode at the head of the soldiers. When he got near the battlefield, a great part of the king's men had already fallen, and little was wanting to make the rest give way. Then the youth galloped thither, with his iron soldiers, broke like a hurricane over the enemy, and beat down all who opposed him. They began to fly, but the youth pursued and never stopped until there was not a single man left. Instead, however, of returning to the king, he conducted his troop by byways back to the forest and called forth Iron John. "What dost thou desire?" asked the wild man. "Take back thy horse and thy troops, and give me my three-legged horse again." All that he asked was done, and soon he was riding on his three-legged horse. When the king returned to his palace, his daughter went to meet him and wished him joy of his victory. "I am not the one who carried away the victory," said he, "but a stranger knight who came to my assistance with his soldiers." The daughter wanted to hear who the strange knight was, but the king did not know, and said, "He followed the enemy, and I did not see him again." She inquired of the gardener where his boy was, but he smiled and said, "He has just come home on his three-legged horse, and the others have been mocking him and crying, 'Here comes our hobblety jig back again.' They asked, too, 'Under what hedge hast thou been lying sleeping all the time?' He, however, said, 'I did the best of all, and it would have gone badly without me.' And then he was still more ridiculed. So the king said to his daughter, 'I will proclaim a great feast that shall last for 3 days, and thou shalt throw a golden apple. Perhaps the unknown will come to it.' When the feast was announced, the youth went out to the forest and called Iron John. "What dost thou desire?" asked he. "That I may catch the king's daughter's golden apple." "It is as safe as if thou hadst it already," said Iron John. "Thou shalt likewise have a suit of red armor for the occasion, and ride on a spirited chestnut horse." When the day came, the youth galloped to the spot, took his place amongst the knights, and was recognized by no one. The king's daughter came forward and threw a golden apple to the knights, but none of them caught it. But he only, as soon as he had it, he galloped away. On the second day, Iron John equipped him as a white knight and gave him a white horse. Again, he was the only one who caught the apple, and he did not linger an instant, but galloped off with it. The king grew angry and said, "That is not allowed. He must appear before me and tell his name." He gave the order that if the knight who caught the apple should go away again, they should pursue him, and if he would not come back willingly, they were to cut him down and stab him. On the third day, he received from Iron John a suit of black armor and a black horse. And again he caught the apple. But when he was riding off with it, the king's attendants pursued him, and one of them got so near him that he wounded the youth's leg with the point of his sword. The youth nevertheless escaped from them, but his horse leapt so violently that the helmet fell from the youth's head, and they could see that he had golden hair. They rode back and announced this to the king. The following day, the king's daughter asked the gardener about his boy. "He is at work in the garden. The queer creature has been at the festival too, and only came home yesterday evening. He has likewise shown my children 3 golden apples, which he has won." The king had him summoned into his presence, and he came and again had his little cap on his head. But the king's daughter went up to him and took it off, and then his golden hair fell down over his shoulders, and he was so handsome that all were amazed. "Art thou the knight who came every day to the festival, always in different colors, and who caught the 3 golden apples?" asked the king. "Yes," answered he, "and here the apples are." And he took them out of his pocket and returned them to the king. "If you desire further proof, you may see the wound which your people gave me when they followed me. But I am likewise the knight who helped you to your victory over your enemies. If thou canst perform such deeds as that thou art no gardener's boy, tell me who is thy father." "My father is a mighty king, and gold have I in plenty, as great as I require." "I well see," said the king, "that I owe thanks to thee. Can I do anything to please thee?" "Yes," answered he, "that indeed you can. Give me your daughter to wife." The maiden laughed and said, "He does not stand much on ceremony, but I have already seen by his golden hair that he was no gardener's boy." And then she went and kissed him. His father and mother came to the wedding and were in great delight, for they had given up all hope of ever seeing their dear son again. And as they were sitting at the marriage feast, the music suddenly stopped. The doors opened, and a stately king came in with a great retinue. He went up to the youth, embraced him, and said, "I am Iron John, and was by enchantment a wild man, but thou hast set me free. All the treasures which I possess shall be thy property." The raven, there was once upon a time a queen who had a little daughter who was still so young that she had to be carried. One day, the child was naughty and the mother might say what she liked, but the child would not be quiet. Then she became impatient, and as the ravens were flying about the palace, she opened the window and said, "I wish you were a raven and would fly away, and then I should have some rest." Scarcely had she spoken the words before the child was changed into a raven and flew from her arms out of the window. It flew into a dark forest and stayed in it a long time, and the parents heard nothing of their child. Then, one day, a man was on his way through this forest and heard the raven crying and followed the voice. And when he came nearer, the bird said, "I am a king's daughter by birth and am bewitched, but thou canst set me free." "What am I to do?" asked he. She said, "Go further into the forest, and thou wilt find a house wherein sits an aged woman who will offer thee meat and drink. But you must accept nothing, for if you eatest and drinkest anything, thou wilt fall into a sleep, and then thou wilt not be able to deliver me. In the garden behind the house there is a great heap of tan, and on this thou shalt stand and wait for me. For 3 days I will come every afternoon at 2 o'clock in a carriage. On the first day, 4 white horses will be harnessed to it, then 4 chestnut horses, and lastly 4 black ones. But if thou art not awake, but sleeping, I shall not be set free." The man promised to do everything that she desired, but the raven said, "Alas, I know already that thou wilt not deliver me. Thou wilt accept something from the woman." Then the man once more promised that he would certainly not touch anything, either to eat or to drink. But when he entered the house, the old woman came to him and said, "Poor man, how faint you are. Come and refresh yourself. Eat and drink." "No," said the man, "I will not eat or drink." She, however, let him have no peace, and said, "If you will not eat, take 1 drink out of the glass. 1 is nothing." Then he let himself be persuaded and drank. Shortly before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he went into the garden to the tan heap to wait for the raven. As he was standing there, his weariness all at once became so great that he could not struggle against it, and lay down for a short time, but he was determined not to go to sleep. Hardly, however, had he lain down than his eyes closed of their own accord, and he fell asleep and slept so soundly that nothing in the world could have aroused him. At 2 o'clock, the raven came driving up with 4 white horses, but she was already in deep grief and said, "I know he is asleep." And when she came into the garden, he was indeed lying there asleep on the heap of tan. She alighted from the carriage, went to him, shook him, and called him, but he did not awake. Next day, about noon, the old woman came again and brought him food and drink, but he would not take any of it. But she let him have no rest and persuaded him until at length he again took 1 drink out of the glass. Towards 2 o'clock, he went into the garden to the tan heap to wait for the raven, but all at once felt such a great weariness that his limbs would no longer support him. He could not help himself and was forced to lie down and fell into a heavy sleep. When the raven drove up with 4 brown horses, she was already full of grief and said, "I know he is asleep." She went to him, but there he lay sleeping, and there was no wakening him. Next day, the old woman asked what was the meaning of this. He was neither eating nor drinking anything. Did he want to die? He replied, "I am not allowed to eat or drink, and will not do so." But she set a dish with food and a glass with wine before him, and when he smelt it, he could not resist, and swallowed a deep draught. When the time came, he went out into the garden to the heap of tan and waited for the king's daughter. But he became still more weary than on the day before, and lay down and slept as soundly as if he had been a stone. At 2 o'clock, the raven came with 4 black horses, and the coachman and everything else was black. She was already in the deepest grief, and said, "I know that he is asleep, and cannot deliver me." When she came to him, there he was lying fast asleep. She shook him and called him, but she could not waken him. Then she laid a loaf beside him, and after that a piece of meat, and thirdly a bottle of wine. And he might consume as much of all of them as he liked, but they would never grow less. After this, she took a gold ring from her finger and put it on his, and her name was graven on it. Lastly, she laid a letter beside him, wherein was written what she had given him, and that none of the things would ever grow less. And in it was also written, "I see right well that here you will never be able to deliver me. But if thou art still willing to deliver me, come to the golden castle of Stromberg. It lies in thy power, of that I am certain." And when she had given him all these things, she seated herself in her carriage and drove to the golden castle of Stromberg. When the man awoke and saw that he had slept, he was sad at heart, and said, "She has certainly driven by, and I have not set her free." Then he perceived the things which were lying beside him, and read the letter wherein was written how everything had happened. So he arose and went away, intending to go to the golden castle of Stromberg, but he did not know where it was. After he had walked about the world for a long time, he entered into a dark forest and walked for 14 days, and still could not find his way out. Then it was once more evening, and he was so tired that he lay down in a thicket and fell asleep. Next day he went onwards, and in the evening, as he was again about to lie down beneath some bushes, he heard such a howling and crying that he could not go to sleep. And at the time when people light the candles, he saw one glimmering, and arose and went towards it. Then he came to a house which seemed very small, for in front of it a great giant was standing. He thought to himself, "If I go in and the giant sees me, it will very likely cost me my life." At length he ventured it and went in. When the giant saw him, he said, "It is well that thou comest, for it is long since I have eaten. I will at once eat thee for my supper." "I'd rather you would leave that alone," said the man. "I do not like to be eaten, but if thou hast any desire to eat, I have quite enough here to satisfy thee." "If that be true," said the giant, "thou mayest be easy. I was only going to devour thee because I had nothing else." Then they went and sat down to the table, and the man took out the bread, wine, and meat, which would never come to an end. "This pleases me well," said the giant, and ate to his heart's content. Then the man said to him, "Canst thou tell me where the golden castle of Stromberg is?" The giant said, "I will look at my map. All the towns and villages and houses are to be found on it." He brought out the map which he had in the room and looked for the castle, but it was not to be found on it. "It's no matter," said he. "I have some still larger maps in my cupboard upstairs, and we will look in them." But there, too, it was in vain. The man now wanted to go onwards, but the giant begged him to wait a few days longer until his brother, who had gone out to bring some provisions, came home. When the brother came home, they inquired about the golden castle of Stromberg. He replied, "When I have eaten and have had enough, I will look in the map." Then he went with them up to his chamber, and they searched in his map, but could not find it. Then he brought out still older maps, and they never rested until they found the golden castle of Stromberg, but it was many thousand miles away. "How am I to get there?" asked the man. The giant said, "I have 2 hours' time during which I will carry you into the neighborhood. But after that, I must be at home to suckle the child that we have." So the giant carried the man to about 100 leagues from the castle and said, "Thou canst very well walk the rest of the way alone." And he turned back, but the man went onwards day and night, until at length he came to the golden castle of Stromberg. It stood on a glass mountain, and the bewitched maiden drove in her carriage round the castle and then went inside it. He rejoiced when he saw her and wanted to climb up to her, but when he began to do so, he always slipped down the glass again. And when he saw that he could not reach her, he was filled with trouble and said to himself, "I will stay down here below and wait for her." So he built himself a hut and stayed in it for a whole year, and every day saw the king's daughter driving about above, but never could go to her. Then one day he saw from his hut 3 robbers who were beating each other, and cried to them, "God be with ye." They stopped when they heard the cry, but as they saw no one, they once more began to beat each other, and that too most dangerously. So he again cried, "God be with ye." Again they stopped, looked round about, but as they saw no one, they went on beating each other. Then he cried for the 3rd time, "God be with ye," and thought, "I must see what these 3 are about," and went thither and asked why they were beating each other so furiously. One of them said that he found a stick, and that when he struck a door with it, that door would spring open. The next said that he had found a mantle, and that whenever he put it on, he was invisible. But the 3rd said he had found a horse on which a man could ride everywhere, even up the glass mountain. And now they did not know whether they ought to have these things in common or whether they ought to divide them. Then the man said, "I will give you something in exchange for these 3 things. Money indeed have I not, but I have other things of more value. But first, I must try yours to see if you have told the truth." Then they put him on the horse, threw the mantle round him, and gave him the stick in his hand. And when he had all these things, they were no longer able to see him. So he gave them some vigorous blows, and cried, "Now, vagabonds, you have got what you deserve. Are you satisfied?" And he rode up the glass mountain. But when he came in front of the castle at the top, it was shut. Then he struck the door with his stick, and it sprang open immediately. He went in and ascended the stairs until he came to the hall, where the maiden was sitting with a golden cup full of wine before her. She, however, could not see him because he had the mantle on. And when he came up to her, he drew from his finger the ring which she had given him, and threw it into the cup so that it rang. Then she cried, "That is my ring, so the man who is to set me free must be here." So they searched the whole castle and did not find him, but he had gone out and had seated himself on the horse and thrown off the mantle. When they came to the door, they saw him and cried aloud in their delight. Then he alighted and took the king's daughter in his arms, but she kissed him and said, "Now hast thou set me free, and tomorrow we will celebrate our wedding." The wishing table, the gold ass, and the cudgel in the sack. There was once upon a time a tailor who had 3 sons and only 1 goat. But as the goat supported the whole of them with her milk, she was obliged to have good food and to be taken every day to pasture. The sons, therefore, did this in turn. Once the eldest took her to the churchyard, where the finest herbs were to be found, and let her eat and run about there. At night, when it was time to go home, he asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch, meh meh." "Come home then," said the youth, and took hold of the cord round her neck, led her into the stable, and tied her up securely. "Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had as much food as she ought?" "Oh," answered the son, "she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." But the father wished to satisfy himself, and went down to the stable, stroked the dear animal, and asked, "Goat, art thou satisfied?" The goat answered, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without meh meh. What do I hear? Cried the tailor, and ran upstairs, and said to the youth, Hullo thou, liar thou sadist, the goat had had enough, and hast let her hunger. And in his anger he took the yard measure from the wall, and drove him out with blows. Next day it was the turn of the second son, who looked out for a place in the fence of the garden, where nothing but good herbs grew, and the goat cleared them all off. At night, when he wanted to go home, he asked, Goat, art thou satisfied? The goat answered, I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch, meh, meh. Come home then, said the youth, and led her home and tied her up in the stable. Well, said the old tailor, has the goat had as much food as she ought? Oh, answered the son, she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch. The tailor would not rely on this, but went down to the stable and said, Goat, hast thou had enough? The goat answered, Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without meh meh. The godless wretch, cried the tailor, to let such a good animal hunger. And he ran up and drove the youth out of doors with the yard measure. Now came the turn of the third son, who wanted to do the thing well, and sought out some bushes with the finest leaves, and let the goat devour them. In the evening, when he wanted to go home, he asked, Goat, hast thou had enough? The goat answered, I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch, meh meh. Come home then, said the youth, and led her into the stable and tied her up. Well, said the old tailor, has the goat had a proper amount of food? She has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch. The tailor did not trust to that, but went down and asked, Goat, hast thou had enough? The wicked beast answered, Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without, meh, meh. Oh, the brood of liars, cried the tailor, each as wicked and forgetful of his duty as the other. Ye shall no longer make a fool of me. And quite beside himself with anger, he ran upstairs and belabored the poor young fellow so vigorously with the yard measure that he sprang out of the house. The old tailor was now alone with his goat. Next morning, he went down into the stable, caressed the goat, and said, Come, my dear little animal, I will take thee to feed myself. he took her by the rope and conducted her to green hedges and amongst milfoil and whatever else goats like to eat. There thou mayest for once eat to thy heart's content, said he to her, and let her browse till evening. Then he asked, Goat, art thou satisfied? She replied, I have eaten so much. Not a leaf more I'll touch, meh, meh. Come home then, said the tailor, and led her into the stable and tied her fast. When he was going away, he turned round again and said, Well, art thou satisfied for once? But the goat did not behave the better to him, and cried, Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without meh, meh. When the tailor heard that he was shocked, and saw clearly that he had driven away his 3 sons without cause. Wait, thou ungrateful creature, cried he. It is not enough to drive thee forth. I will mark thee so that thou wilt no more dare to show thyself amongst honest tailors. In great haste, he ran upstairs, fetched his razor, lathered the goat's head, and shaved her as clean as the palm of his hand. And as the yard measure would have been too good for her, he brought the horsewhip and gave her such cuts with it that she ran away in violent haste. When the tailor was thus left quite alone in his house, he fell into great grief and would gladly have had his sons back again. But no one knew whither they were gone. The eldest had apprenticed himself to a joiner, and learnt industriously and indefatigably. And when the time came for him to go traveling, his master presented him with a little table, which had no particular appearance, and was made of common wood, but it had one good property. If anyone set it out and said, Little table, spread thyself, the good little table was at once covered with a clean little cloth, and a plate was there, and a knife and fork beside it, and dishes with boiled meats and roasted meats, as many as there was room for, and a great glass of red wine shone, so that it made the heart glad. The young journeyman thought, With this thou hast enough for thy whole life, and went joyously about the world, and never troubled himself at all whether an inn was good or bad, or if anything was to be found in it or not. When it suited him, he did not enter an inn at all, but either on the plain in a wood, a meadow, or wherever he fancied. He took his little table off his back, set it down before him, and said, Cover thyself. And then, everything appeared that his heart desired. At length, he took it into his head to go back to his father, whose anger would now be appeased, and who would now willingly receive him with his wishing table. It came to pass that on his way home he came one evening to an inn which was filled with guests. They bade him welcome and invited him to sit and eat with them, for otherwise he would have difficulty in getting anything. "No," answered the joiner, "I will not take the few bites out of your mouths, rather than that you shall be my guests." They laughed and thought he was jesting with them. He, however, placed his wooden table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." Instantly, it was covered with food so good that the host could never have procured it, and the smell of it ascended pleasantly to the nostrils of the guests. "Fall to dear friends," said the joiner, and the guests, when they saw that he meant it did not need to be asked twice, but drew near, pulled out their knives, and attacked it valiantly. And what surprised them the most was that when a dish became empty, a full one instantly took its place of its own accord. The innkeeper stood in one corner and watched the affair. He did not at all know what to say, but thought, "Thou couldst easily find a use for such a cook as that in thy kitchen." The joiner and his comrades made merry until late into the night. At length, they lay down to sleep, and the young apprentice also went to bed and set his magic table against the wall. The host's thoughts, however, let him have no rest. It occurred to him that there was a little old table in his lumber room which looked just like the apprentice's, and he brought it out quite softly and exchanged it for the wishing table. Next morning, the joiner paid for his bed, took up his table, never thinking that he had got a false one, and went his way. At midday, he reached his father, who received him with great joy. "Well, my dear son, what hast thou learnt?" said he to him. "Father, I have become a joiner." "A good trade," replied the old man. "But what hast thou brought back with thee from thy apprenticeship?" "Father, the best thing which I have brought back with me is this little table." The tailor inspected it on all sides and said, "Thou didst not make a masterpiece when thou madst that. It is a bad old table." "But it is a table which furnishes itself," replied the son. "When I set it out and tell it to cover itself, the most beautiful dishes stand on it, and a wine also which gladdens the heart. Just invite all our relations and friends. They shall refresh and enjoy themselves for once, for the table will give them all they require. When the company was assembled, he put his table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." But the little table did not bestir itself, and remained just as bare as any other table which did not understand language. Then the poor apprentice became aware that his table had been changed, and was ashamed at having to stand there like a liar. The relations, however, mocked him, and were forced to go home without having eaten or drunk. The father brought out his patches again, and went on tailoring, but the son went to a master in the craft. The second son had gone to a miller, and had apprenticed himself to him. When his years were over, the master said, "As thou hast conducted thyself so well, I give thee an ass of a peculiar kind, which neither draws a cart nor carries a sack." "To what use is he put then?" asked the young apprentice. "He lets gold drop from his mouth," answered the miller. "If thou settest him on a cloth, and sayest, 'Bricklebrit,' the good animal will drop gold pieces for thee." "That is a fine thing," said the apprentice, and thanked the master, and went out into the world. When he had need of gold, he had only to say, "Bricklebrit," to his ass, and it rained gold pieces, and he had nothing to do but pick them off the ground. Wheresoever he went, the best of everything was good enough for him, and the dearer the better, for he had always a full purse. When he had looked about the world for some time, he thought, "Thou must seek out thy father. If thou goest to him with the gold ass, he will forget his anger and receive thee well." It came to pass that he came to the same public house in which his brother's table had been exchanged. He led his ass by the bridle, and the host was about to take the animal from him and tie him up. But the young apprentice said, "Don't trouble yourself. I will take my gray horse into the stable and tie him up myself too, for I must know where he stands." This struck the host as odd, and he thought that a man who was forced to look after his ass himself could not have much to spend. But when the stranger put his hand in his pocket and brought out 2 gold pieces, and said he was to provide something good for him, the host opened his eyes wide and ran and sought out the best he could muster. After dinner, the guest asked what he owed. The host did not see why he should not double the reckoning, and said the apprentice must give 2 more gold pieces. He felt in his pocket, but his gold was just at an end. "Wait an instant, Sir Host," said he. "I will go and fetch some money." But he took the tablecloth with him. The host could not imagine what this could mean, and being curious, stole after him. And as the guest bolted the stable door, he peeped through a hole left by a knot in the wood. The stranger spread out the cloth under the animal and cried, "Bricklebrit!" And immediately the beast began to let gold pieces fall, so that it fairly rained down money on the ground. My word," said the host, "ducats are quickly coined there. A purse like that is not amiss." The guest paid his score and went to bed. But in the night, the host stole down into the stable, led away the master of the mint, and tied up another ass in his place. Early next morning, the apprentice traveled away with his ass, and thought that he had his gold ass. At midday, he reached his father, who rejoiced to see him again, and gladly took him in. "What hast thou made of thyself, my son?" asked the old man. "A miller." "Dear father," he answered, "what hast thou brought back with thee from thy travels? Nothing else but an ass." "There are asses enough here," said the father. "I would rather have had a good goat." "Yes," replied the son, "but it is no common ass, but a gold ass, when I say Bricklebrit. The good beast opens its mouth and drops a whole sheetful of gold pieces. Just summon all our relations hither, and I will make them rich folks." "That suits me well," said the tailor, "for then I shall have no need to torment myself any longer with the needle," and ran out himself and called the relations together. As soon as they were assembled, the miller bade them make way, spread out his cloth, and brought the ass into the room. "Now watch," said he, and cried, "Bricklebrit!" But no gold pieces fell, and it was clear that the animal knew nothing of the art, for every ass does not attain such perfection. Then the poor miller pulled a long face, saw that he was betrayed, and begged pardon of the relatives who went home as poor as they came. There was no help for it. The old man had to betake him to his needle once more, and the youth hired himself to a miller. The third brother had apprenticed himself to a turner, and as that is skilled labor, he was the longest in learning. His brothers, however, told him in a letter how badly things had gone with them, and how the innkeeper had cheated them of their beautiful wishing gifts on the last evening before they reached home. When the turner had served his time and had to set out on his travels, as he had conducted himself so well, his master presented him with a sack and said, "There is a cudgel in it." "I can put on the sack," said he, "and it may be of good service to me, but why should the cudgel be in it? It only makes it heavy." "I will tell thee why," replied the master. "If anyone has done anything to injure thee, do but say, 'Out of the sack, Cudgel.' And the cudgel will leap forth among the people and play such a dance on their backs that they will not be able to stir or move for a week. And it will not leave off until thou sayest, 'Into the sack, Cudgel.'" The apprentice thanked him and put the sack on his back. And when anyone came too near him and wished to attack him, he said, "Out of the sack, Cudgel." And instantly the cudgel sprang out and dusted the coat or jacket of one after the other on their backs, and never stopped until it had stripped it off them. And it was done so quickly that before anyone was aware, it was already his own turn. In the evening, the young turner reached the inn where his brothers had been cheated. He laid his sack on the table before him and began to talk of all the wonderful things which he had seen in the world. "Yes," said he, "people may easily find a table which will cover itself a gold ass, and things of that kind, extremely good things, which I by no means despise. But these are nothing in comparison with the treasure which I have won for myself, and am carrying about with me in my sack there." The innkeeper pricked up his ears. "What in the world can that be?" thought he. "The sack must be filled with nothing but jewels. I ought to get them cheap, too, for all good things go in threes." When it was time for sleep, the guest stretched himself on the bench and laid his sack beneath him for a pillow. When the innkeeper thought his guest was lying in a sound sleep, he went to him and pushed and pulled quite gently and carefully at the sack to see if he could possibly draw it away and lay another in its place. The turner had, however, been waiting for this for a long time, and now just as the innkeeper was about to give a hearty tug, he cried, "Out of the sack, Cudgel." Instantly, the little cudgel came forth and fell on the innkeeper and gave him a sound thrashing. The host cried for mercy, but the louder he cried, so much more heavily, the cudgel beat the time on his back until at length he fell to the ground, exhausted. Then the turner said, "If thou dost not give back the table which covers itself, and the gold ass, the dance shall begin afresh." "Oh no," cried the host quite humbly. I will gladly produce everything. Only make the accursed kobold creep back into the sack." Then said the apprentice, "I will let mercy take the place of justice, but beware of getting into mischief again." So he cried, "Into the sack, Cudgel, and let him have rest." Next morning, the turner went home to his father with the wishing table and the gold ass. The tailor rejoiced when he saw him once more, and asked him likewise what he had learned in foreign parts. "Dear father," said he, "I have become a turner." "A skilled trade," said the father. "What hast thou brought back with thee from thy travels?" "A precious thing, dear father," replied the son, "a cudgel in the sack." "What?" cried the father. "A cudgel? That's worth thy trouble indeed. From every tree thou can cut thyself one. But not one like this, dear father. If I say, 'Out of the sack, Cudgel,' the cudgel springs out and leads anyone who means ill with me a weary dance, and never stops until he lies on the ground and prays for fair weather. Look you, with this cudgel have I got back the wishing table and the gold ass which the thievish innkeeper took away from my brothers. Now let them both be sent for, and invite all our kinsmen. I will give them to eat and to drink, and will fill their pockets with gold into the bargain." The old tailor would not quite believe, but nevertheless got the relatives together. Then the turner spread a cloth in the room and led in the gold ass, and said to his brother, "Now, dear brother, speak to him." The miller said, "Bricklebrit," and instantly the gold pieces fell down on the cloth like a thunder shower, and the ass did not stop until every one of them had so much that he could carry no more. I can see in thy face that thou also wouldst like to be there. Then the turner brought the little table and said, "Now, dear brother, speak to it." And scarcely had the carpenter said, "Table, cover thyself," than it was spread and amply covered with the most exquisite dishes. Then such a meal took place as the good tailor had never yet known in his house, and the whole party of kinsmen stayed together till far in the night, and were all merry and glad. The tailor locked away needle and thread, yard measure, and goose in a press, and lived with his 3 sons in joy and splendor. What, however, has become of the goat, who was to blame for the tailor driving out his 3 sons, that I will tell thee. She was ashamed that she had a bald head, and ran to a fox's hole and crept into it. When the fox came home, he was met by two great eyes shining out of the darkness, and was terrified and ran away. A bear met him, and as the fox looked quite disturbed, he said, "What is the matter with thee, brother fox? Why dost thou look like that?" "Ah," answered Redskin, "a fierce beast is in my cave and stared at me with its fiery eyes. We will soon drive him out," said the bear, and went with him to the cave and looked in. But when he saw the fiery eyes, fear seized on him likewise. He would have nothing to do with the furious beast, and took to his heels. The bee met him, and as she saw that he was ill at ease, she said, "Bear, thou art really pulling a very pitiful face. What has become of all thy gaiety?" "It is all very well for thee to talk," replied the bear. "A furious beast with staring eyes is in Redskin's house, and we can't drive him out." The bee said, "Bear, I pity thee. I am a poor, weak creature whom thou wouldst not turn aside to look at, but still I believe I can help thee." She flew into the fox's cave, lighted on the goat's smoothly shorn head, and stung her so violently that she sprang up, crying, "Meh, meh," and ran forth into the world as if mad. And to this hour, no one knows where she has gone. Godfather Death. Once upon a time, there lived a poor man who toiled with his hands day and night, yet scarcely earned enough to feed the 12 children who crowded his humble hut. His back was bent from labor, and his eyes burned with weariness. But still, the mouths were many, and the bread was little. And when fate sent him a 13th child, he despaired, for his heart knew not where to turn. Driven by need, he ran into the open highway, determined that the very first stranger he encountered should be chosen as godfather, for he could no longer think what else to do. The first figure to meet him was none other than the Lord God himself, who already knew the thoughts hidden in the poor man's heart. God spoke with kindness, saying, "Poor man, I pity you. I will take your little one under my care, stand at his baptism, and bless him so that he may know joy and goodness upon the earth." The man, though trembling, asked, "And who are you that you promise me so much?" "I am God," answered the Lord. But the poor man shook his head and replied, "Then I do not wish you for a godfather, for you give riches to those who already have much, and leave the poor to starve. Thus spoke the man, not knowing the secret wisdom with which God apportions wealth and want, nor how he weighs fortune and burden in hidden scales. Turning his back upon the Lord of heaven, the man went on his way. Soon there came another, striding along the road with dark eyes and a cunning smile. It was the devil who whispered, "What do you seek, man? If you take me as Godfather for your child, I will pour gold into his hands, grant him pleasures without end, and fill his life with every delight of the world." "And who are you?" asked the man again. "I am the devil," came the reply. The man recoiled and said, "Then I do not wish you for a godfather, for you deceive mankind, lead them astray, and bring ruin where you walk." He turned from him as well, and at last there came a pale figure hobbling on withered legs, his face neither cruel nor kind, but cold and certain. He said, "Take me as your child's godfather." "Who are you?" asked the man. "I am Death, who makes all men equal. I spare neither king nor beggar, but take both alike when their hour strikes." The poor man considered and said, "Yes, you are the right one. You treat rich and poor alike, making no difference between them. You shall be my child's godfather." And Death answered, "I will make your child prosper, and he shall become known and honored, for whoever has me for a friend cannot fail." On the appointed Sunday, Death came as he had promised, and served as godfather in a proper and orderly manner. When the boy grew to manhood, Death appeared before him and bade him follow into the forest. There he pointed to an herb that grew in secret places. This said, "Death is your godfather's gift. I will make you a great physician. Whenever you are called to the bedside of the sick, I will appear as well. If I stand by the head, then know with certainty that life may be restored. Give the sick a portion of this herb, and he shall recover. But if I stand by the feet, then the life belongs to me, and you must speak the truth that no healing is possible. Beware. Should you defy me and use this herb against my will, disaster shall befall you." The young man obeyed, and before long his fame spread through every land. People said, "He need only look upon the sick to know whether life will return or death will claim them." Kings and peasants alike summoned him, and he grew so rich from gifts of gold and silver that he lived like a lord. But one day, the king himself fell gravely ill. The physician was called, and when he entered the chamber, behold, death stood at the king's feet. No medicine on earth could save him. The physician trembled. If I could trick death. But once he thought he may be angered, yet for love of his godson, he will close one eye. Then boldly he turned the king in his bed, so that death now stood at the head, and he gave the herb. At once the king's color returned, and he rose, hale and strong. Death came later, his face black with wrath. He lifted a bony finger and said, "You have betrayed me. For your sake, because you are my godson, I forgive it once. But beware, should you deceive me again, it will cost you your life." Not long after, the king's only daughter fell into mortal sickness. She was fair as the dawn, and the king wept so sorely that his sight dimmed from tears. He proclaimed that whoever could save her would win her hand and inherit the crown. When the physician entered the chamber, he saw death at the maiden's feet. He remembered the warning, yet when he looked upon her beauty and thought of her as his bride, wisdom and caution flew away. He grasped the princess, turned her so that death stood at her head, and gave the healing herb. Her cheeks grew rosy, and life flowed back into her. But death cheated a second time, strode forward in fury. "Now it is your turn," he thundered. With his ice-cold hand, he seized the physician and dragged him into the depths of the earth, into a cavern vast as the night. There the young man beheld thousands upon thousands of candles, burning in endless rows, some tall and bright, others small and flickering. Every moment, one flame sputtered out, while another was newly kindled. These said, "Death are the life lights of mankind. The tall belong to children, the middle to men in their strength, the tiny to the old. Yet often the young have but a spark, and the aged a great flame." The physician asked his heart, pounding, "Show me my candle." And death pointed to a small stump, guttering and ready to die. There it is. Horror seized the man. "Oh, dear Godfather," he begged, "light me a new one. Grant me more years that I may enjoy life and take the princess as my wife." "I cannot," said Death. "A flame must go out before another can be lit. Then place what remains upon a new candle, so that the old may burn into the new." Death pretended to grant the wish. He lifted a fresh, tall candle, but in his cold vengeance, he let the old stump slip. It sputtered, fell, and went out. In that same instant, the physician sank to the ground. His life ended, and his soul given at last into the hands of death. Our Lady's child, hard by a great forest, dwelt a woodcutter with his wife, who had an only child, a little girl 3 years old. They were so poor, however, that they no longer had daily bread and did not know how to get food for her. One morning, the woodcutter went out sorrowfully to his work in the forest, and while he was cutting wood, suddenly there stood before him a tall and beautiful woman with a crown of shining stars on her head, who said to him, "I am the Virgin Mary, mother of the child Jesus. Thou art poor and needy. Bring thy child to me. I will take her with me and be her mother and care for her." The woodcutter obeyed, brought his child, and gave her to the Virgin Mary, who took her up to heaven with her. There the child fared well, ate sugar cakes, and drank sweet milk, and her clothes were of gold, and the little angels played with her. And when she was 14 years of age, the Virgin Mary called her one day and said, "Dear child, I am about to make a long journey, so take into thy keeping the keys of the 13 doors of heaven. 12 of these thou mayest open, and behold the glory which is within them, but the 13th, to which this little key belongs, is forbidden thee. Beware of opening it, or thou wilt bring misery on thyself." The girl promised to be obedient, and when the Virgin Mary was gone, she began to examine the dwellings of the kingdom of heaven. Each day she opened one of them until she had made the round of the 12. In each of them sat one of the apostles in the midst of a great light, and she rejoiced in all the magnificence and splendor, and the little angels, who always accompanied her, rejoiced with her. Then the forbidden door alone remained, and she felt a great desire to know what could be hidden behind it, and said to the angels, "I will not quite open it, and I will not go inside it, but I will unlock it so that we can just see a little through the opening." "Oh no," said the little angels, "that would be a sin. The Virgin Mary has forbidden it, and it might easily cause thy unhappiness." Then she was silent, but the desire in her heart was not stilled, but gnawed there, and tormented her, and let her have no rest. And once, when the angels had all gone out, she thought, "Now I am quite alone, and I could peep in. If I do it, no one will ever know." She sought out the key, and when she had got it in her hand, she put it in the lock, and when she had put it in, she turned it round as well. Then the door sprang open, and she saw there the Trinity sitting in fire and splendor. She stayed there a while and looked at everything in amazement. Then she touched the light a little with her finger, and her finger became quite golden. Immediately, a great fear fell on her. She shut the door violently and ran away. Her terror, too, would not quit her, let her do what she might, and her heart beat continually and would not be still. The gold, too, stayed on her finger and would not go away. Let her rub it and wash it, never so much. It was not long before the Virgin Mary came back from her journey. She called the girl before her and asked to have the keys of heaven back. When the maiden gave her the bunch, the Virgin looked into her eyes and said, "Hast thou not opened the 13th door also?" "No," she replied. Then she laid her hand on the girl's heart and felt how it beat and beat, and saw right well that she had disobeyed her order and had opened the door. Then she said once again, "Art thou certain that thou hast not done it?" "Yes," said the girl for the second time. Then she perceived the finger which had become golden from touching the fire of heaven, and saw well that the child had sinned, and said for the third time, "Hast thou not done it?" "No," said the girl for the third time. Then said the Virgin Mary, "Thou hast not obeyed me, and besides that thou hast lied, thou art no longer worthy to be in heaven." Then the girl fell into a deep sleep, and when she awoke, she lay on the earth below, and in the midst of a wilderness. She wanted to cry out, but she could bring forth no sound. She sprang up and wanted to run away, but whithersoever she turned herself, she was continually held back by thick hedges of thorns through which she could not break. In the desert in which she was imprisoned, there stood an old hollow tree, and this had to be her dwelling place. Into this she crept when night came, and here she slept. Here, too, she found a shelter from storm and rain, but it was a miserable life, and bitterly did she weep when she remembered how happy she had been in heaven, and how the angels had played with her. Roots and wild berries were her only food, and for these she sought, as far as she could go. In the autumn, she picked up the fallen nuts and leaves and carried them into the hole. The nuts were her food in winter, and when snow and ice came, she crept amongst the leaves like a poor little animal, that she might not freeze. Before long, her clothes were all torn, and one bit of them after another fell off her. As soon, however, as the sun shone warm again, she went out and sat in front of the tree, and her long hair covered her on all sides like a mantle. Thus she sat year after year and felt the pain and the misery of the world. One day, when the trees were once more clothed in fresh green, the king of the country was hunting in the forest and followed a roe. And as it had fled into the thicket which shut in this part of the forest, he got off his horse, tore the bushes asunder, and cut himself a path with his sword. When he had at last forced his way through, he saw a wonderfully beautiful maiden sitting under the tree. And she sat there and was entirely covered with her golden hair down to her very feet. He stood still and looked at her full of surprise. Then he spoke to her and said, "Who art thou? Why art thou sitting here in the wilderness?" But she gave no answer, for she could not open her mouth. The king continued, "Wilt thou go with me to my castle?" Then she just nodded her head a little. The king took her in his arms, carried her to his horse, and rode home with her. And when he reached the royal castle, he caused her to be dressed in beautiful garments, and gave her all things in abundance. Although she could not speak, she was still so beautiful and charming that he began to love her with all his heart, and it was not long before he married her. After a year or so had passed, the queen brought a son into the world. Thereupon the Virgin Mary appeared to her in the night, when she lay in her bed alone, and said, "If thou wilt tell the truth, and confess that thou didst unlock the forbidden door, I will open thy mouth and give thee back thy speech. But if thou perseverest in thy sin and deniest obstinately, I will take thy newborn child away with me." Then the queen was permitted to answer, but she remained hard and said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." And the Virgin Mary took the newborn child from her arms and vanished with it. Next morning, when the child was not to be found, it was whispered among the people that the queen was a man-eater and had killed her own child. She heard all this and could say nothing to the contrary, but the king would not believe it for he loved her so much. When a year had gone by, the queen again bore a son, and in the night the Virgin Mary again came to her and said, "If thou wilt confess that thou openedst the forbidden door, I will give thee thy child back and untie thy tongue. But if you continuest in sin and deniest it, I will take away with me this new child also." Then the queen again said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." And the Virgin took the child out of her arms and away with her to heaven. Next morning, when this child also had disappeared, the people declared quite loudly that the queen had devoured it, and the king's counselors demanded that she should be brought to justice. The king, however, loved her so dearly that he would not believe it, and commanded the counselors, under pain of death, not to say any more about it. The following year, the queen gave birth to a beautiful little daughter, and for the third time, the Virgin Mary appeared to her in the night and said, "Follow me." She took the queen by the hand and led her to heaven, and showed her there her two eldest children, who smiled at her and were playing with the ball of the world. When the queen rejoiced thereat, the Virgin Mary said, "Is thy heart not yet softened? If thou wilt own that thou openedst the forbidden door, I will give thee back thy two little sons." But for the third time, the queen answered, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." Then the Virgin let her sink down to earth once more, and took from her, likewise, her third child. Next morning, when the loss was reported abroad, all the people cried loudly, "The queen is a man-eater. She must be judged." And the king was no longer able to restrain his counselors. Thereupon a trial was held, and as she could not answer and defend herself, she was condemned to be burnt alive. The wood was got together, and when she was fast bound to the stake, and the fire began to burn round about her, the hard ice of pride melted. Her heart was moved by repentance, and she thought, "If I could but confess before my death that I opened the door." Then her voice came back to her, and she cried out loudly, "Yes, Mary, I did it." And straightway rain fell from the sky and extinguished the flames of fire, and a light broke forth above her, and the Virgin Mary descended with the two little sons by her side, and the newborn daughter in her arms. She spoke kindly to her and said, "He who repents his sin and acknowledges it is forgiven." Then she gave her the three children untied her tongue and granted her happiness for her whole life.